My name's Sabrina Ramonov, and this is part 4 of my video series, Build SaaS with AI. And in this video and the next couple of videos, we're just going to focus on adding more features, adding a database, getting the app to a point that is launchable. But first, I want to talk about my process for adding new features, especially new logic features. Typically, when building an app, there are 3 concepts to think about. Number 1, the data model. Number 2, the UI, what the user sees. And number 3, the workflows or logic. If this happens, then this other thing should happen. When the user clicks this button, then that triggers this other stuff. So a lot of if-then kind of thinking. So in the last video, we focused on building out the UI, a little bit of logic in terms of putting in a text, calling OpenAI to repurpose that text, and then displaying that text back to the user. We didn't talk about the data model. We left that out. Now we're going to start introducing a database and see what that looks like. And then mostly in this video and the next couple of videos, we're going to be implementing logic features. So when the user does this, this should happen. And here's my step-by-step process for adding a new logic feature. So number 1 actually applies to any feature, creating a new branch in Git. If you haven't heard of Git, it's basically a version control system so that you can easily save your work, try out building new things. If you mess that up, you can roll back to the last stable version. And then if you're happy with your changes, you can merge it back to your main version. And so I really like using Git. Is it necessary? No, but highly recommend it, especially with AI-driven or AI-assisted coding. It's kind of inevitable that AI will mess up some code. And depending on how many changes were made and how aware you were of the changes being made, it could be difficult to precisely reverse everything without breaking something else accidentally. So it's really nice to have version control so you can just go back to the last stable version and try again. Number 2, be ultra specific and clear. This is kind of a common theme when working with AI. The more specific and clear your instructions are, the better answers you're going to get. Number 3, identify all relevant files. So Cursor AI and other AI, they produce better results if you can narrow down the context to a handful of files that they should be editing instead of passing in your entire code base. And this concept is true outside of code. So ChatGPT, for example, it does well with a couple examples, but if you feed in like tons and tons and tons of examples, max out its context window, it usually performs poorly because it doesn't know what to prioritize among all of that data. It doesn't have to be perfect, but try your best to identify the relevant files that Cursor AI should be looking at. And then number 4, I'll show you how to add those files as context within Cursor. It's super easy. You just tag each file with an @ sign, and then there's autocomplete. Then you submit the prompt to Cursor, and then review the code changes and test. Even if you're not technical, look at Cursor's explanation for what it changed and try to follow along in the code base. And then the last step, once everything looks good, is to merge your experimental branch, your feature branch, into main branch. And so even though I haven't done a tutorial on it, I will add a link to the blog post accompanying this video to a step-by-step guide to set up Git for version control. I recommend learning it if you are ever going to touch a piece of code, even if it's just a Python script to do some web scraping. So the first feature I'm going to implement is the ability to edit a prompt that's already been submitted and regenerate the output with a new prompt. So for example, we'll have like default prompts in there for each social media platform, LinkedIn, Twitter will have a different prompt, obviously, but the user might want to tweak the prompt, make sure it's closer to their own voice, make sure it's a certain format, whatever it is. So when they edit the prompt, I want to have one click to regenerate the output with the edited prompt. So number 1, create a new branch. So open up your terminal, whether it's Warp, a default terminal, or Cursor also has its own terminal. Make sure you're in the directory of your project. So CD is the change directory. So go into your project. Mine is temporarily called Remix. Then I'm going to say git branch feature/edit prompt. And this is my typical naming convention for features. So I'll do create a new branch feature/edit prompt versus like a cleanup chore. I'll do like chore/edit-prompt versus like fixing a bug. I'll do bug fix / whatever the bug fix is. And that's totally up to you. That's just kind of how I do things. Okay. So once you create that branch, checkout means we're going to switch to that branch and it will autocomplete. Now you should see this get, and then it should actually say the branch you're on. So get feature/edit-prompt. You can see an earlier history, it said git main, so that's the main branch, and then we've branched out to this experimental branch. The next step for the feature is just to think through like what it is. Do your best to list out step-by-step instructions. So this is kind of my attempt. So when the generate content button is clicked, so that's over here in the app, when generate content is clicked, the prompt should be returned from OpenAI so that the user can edit it. So here. So currently, if I click edit prompt, it's actually blank. So we don't know what prompt was submitted to OpenAI. But what we want is when the user clicks on this, we want the prompt that was submitted to be populated here so I can easily tweak it. Okay. So when the user clicks edit prompt, the prompt used to generate the content should appear in the modal. And then when the user clicks save and regenerate this button, the app should rerun content generation calling OpenAI with a new prompt and display the new content over here in this component, generated content. And again, the more specific you are, like I want to show this text in this particular component, whatever it is, generated content, sidebar, whatever it is, the more specific you can be, the better answers you're going to get from AI, whether it's Cursor, Claude Artifact, whatever you're using. The last thing I want to clarify is I use the existing prompt in generate content as the default prompt. So when a user signs up, we should have a default prompt in there so that using this app doesn't require you to put in a prompt in the first place. We'll have like really high quality prompts for each social media platform out of the box. Okay, so the next step in our process is identify all relevant files. So when the generate content button is clicked, okay, well, like where is that generate content button? So it would be here, right, in content generator. And you can kind of like wing it from the name. I mean, content generator and generated content are like the main things in the app. So those are going to be the things you want. When the user clicks edit prompt, okay, that corresponds to prompt edit modal, right? Like that's the pop-up where they can edit the prompt. And so we'll want to include that file as well. Route.ts over here, the OpenAI library. Obviously, we want to change this so that it takes in the new prompt that has been updated. And so this is really where making sure you're familiar with your own code base really helps in identifying the relevant context, the relevant files for Cursor AI to look at. And the more you can narrow it down instead of feeding in your entire code base, the better answers you'll get from Cursor AI. Okay, and then I'll show you how to add files as context to Cursor, but here's how it looks like with like everything combined. And then I added these two things as well. So add robust logging to help troubleshoot issues. I just like to do that. And then I also want AI to ask me clarifying questions because especially if you're not a software developer or product manager, there's probably like nuances here and you want to make sure that the AI understands what you're asking for. So I like to append these two requirements to each new logic feature prompt. Let's go ahead and copy all this and then we're going to have to actually manually tag the files and I'll show you how to do that. Oh, and real quick, I almost forgot the settings. So I have been playing around with Cursor settings. So I'm actually still on the free trial and I've built like 5 apps with it, which is great. But here, so go to models. I'm just trying to force Cursor to use Claude 3.5 Sonnet. I even put in my Anthropic API key and stuff. And then also over in beta, I enabled long context chat, which uses Claude's 200K token context window. It is slower, obviously, if you're feeding in, lots and lots of files, but we just want to enable it just in case we do that, we don't want to run into any issues. So go ahead and do that in your settings as well. Let me copy paste this. And then we actually need to tag each of these files. So it looks like this, @, and then just start typing the file name. Routes. Okay. And this looks like a lot, but I mean, first of all, in most features we're implementing, it's going to involve like at least 1 or 2 of these files. Once you get used to it, it's not too bad. And then to confirm that it's included in the context, it should look something like this. And then you'll also see the context listed here. So when it says Cursor will use, that's the context it's going to use for our request. Okay, so let's go ahead. So for this, just hit enter. You don't have to hit command enter, again, because command enter feeds the entire code base in as context, whereas we actually want to narrow down the context when we're implementing a feature at a time. So here I just hit enter. And then first, Cursor should ask me a bunch of clarifying questions. We're going to go ahead and answer those. Yep, so here are the clarifying questions. Let me expand this. Here are the answers to the clarifying questions. Yes, each platform individually. Each platform have its platform optimized prompt. Okay, currently the prompt state is not being used. Should we repurpose this to store the global prompt? Okay, so again, we're going to clarify platform-specific prompts. When the user clicks edit prompt for a specific platform, should we show the Okay, so all these are related. Update only the content for the specific platform being edited. So what that means is, like, if I'm repurposing content for Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, but I only want to change the prompt for Twitter, then it should only update the content for Twitter, because that's the prompt that I'm changing. Where exactly should we add logging? Let's do both. I like more logging. Are there any specific error scenarios we should handle and log apart from general API errors? Let's say I'm not sure. We want to log as much as possible to help us troubleshoot issues. Should we implement any rate limiting or error handling? No. Hit enter, and then it's already has the context of this conversation, of this particular chat, and it's using the same files. So now it's going to outline the plan for implementing this feature. Here's the plan. Technical or non-technical, I recommend you read this, try to understand what it's doing. You can ask questions too. You can ask follow-up questions like, what do you mean by doing this? Update the content generator prompt, blah, blah, blah. Update the generated component, pass the full prompt as a prompt to the component, modify prompt edit modal so it displays the full platform-specific prompt, update the API route in OpenAI. Okay, so here it's going to first start with content generator. So let's apply it to this file. And you can see the changes it's making. You can accept or reject individual changes. So green is stuff it's adding, red is stuff it's removing. Let's go ahead and accept that. And before I forget, I just reopened my terminal here. Just make sure you are in the correct branch feature /edit-prompt. Okay, and you can see here we've only edited one file, which is correct. Okay, now let's update generated content. Okay. Now it's modifying prompt edit modal. Okay, click accept. Now it's updating the routes, okay, and then updating OpenAI. Okay, I don't like that it just removed my super long prompt, but that's okay. We can add it back with actual platform specific prompts. The last thing I'll mention, just double check what model you're using here. So for our purposes, I actually just want to use GPT-4o Mini. Next step is to test this implementation thoroughly. How do I run the app? Let's say we forgot how to run the app. Okay, if you haven't already done this, you should have done this from the previous video, but go ahead and do it anyway if you haven't. And then here, npm run dev. Okay, so you can see that here it's starting. Then we'll go to localhost 3000. Okay, this is my old one. Here I'm just copying content, original content. Okay, select the platform. Let's open up the console log. So right click, inspect, go to console. So if there are any errors on the client side, we can see here, and then click generate content. Since we added a bunch of logging, you can actually see like all the logging here, which is pretty cool. I really recommend getting comfortable with scan logs and stuff. So here there was a request, API request, and then this is generating content for Facebook, which is what we selected. And then this is the prompt. Here is the actual input that was sent to the API, so input content. And then here's the input prompt, and now this is sending post request to this endpoint /API/generate content. And then here is the generated content. You can tell with all the emojis. That's not the version I wrote. So this is kind of the same functionality as we left off in the last video. So now we're going to edit this prompt, right? So this is good. This is what we want. So remember before it didn't even show us the prompt to edit. Now this is showing the prompt that was used to generate that output, and we can edit directly here. So let's do something really drastic, like write a 200 character tweet from the input, and then click save and regenerate. Okay, so nothing seemed to change here, but let's check the logs and see what happened. Okay, so here's our latest call, generate content with prompt. Okay, so we know that the front end actually did capture the updated prompt, write a 200 character tweet from the input. The input stayed the same. It's just copy pasted from my blog post. And then here is the generated content, which does look like a tweet. So this generated content is, drastically different from this long form post over here. So that means everything is working except we're not seeing the generated content displayed, but that's good. So we got everything working so far. We just need to display the new generated content. Now what I'm going to do is commit this since it's working. Status. So again, I'm going to link in the newsletter accompanying this. I'm going to link to an awesome Git tutorial if you've never set it up before. But basically the workflow is like you make a bunch of changes, you add those changes, you commit with a message like describing what you've changed. So So now users can edit the prompt submitted to OpenAI. So we know that part's working. The only part that's not working is displaying the new output, right? So that's why I kind of want to commit it. We have a unit of something that is working fine, and we just need to add something else. And so this is a good practice. The less technical you are, I would say commit more frequently, because you want to make sure you can roll back to that stable working version. If you use like GitHub or something, you can actually push this to a remote repository. In my case, it would be git push origin feature/edit prompt. So that's our branch. And then I'll be able to see it in GitHub. Okay. And then here, so I'm just going to click on that link. And I use GitHub for version control. Another one is Bitbucket. That's popular. So here's the repo remix. And you can see now 2 branches, right? Here's our feature/edit prompt branch. And you can see it's 1 commit ahead of main, meaning like I made all of those changes, committed it to this experimental branch. And the goal is like once we're good with this feature, then we'll merge this branch with all of its commits to the main. So that's it. That's all you have to do. So now let's say like you make a bunch of other changes and you mess stuff up and you want to go back to this point we're currently at. All you have to do is git stash. Okay, so let's say we like try implementing displaying content and for some reason just like messes up other code. You can roll back to this exact point where we're at. Yeah, let's keep everything in this context. So now I want to say I see the updated prompt being sent to ChatGPT and I see the generated output with the, or let's say the new prompt being, and I see the generated output with the new prompt is correct, but I don't see the generated output being displayed in the generated content component. Again, be as specific as possible. And then I still like to add, even for a minor thing like this, I want it to ask me clarifying questions. Okay, and then hit enter. Remember to not hit command enter because that'll do the entire code base. Now it's asking me a bunch of clarifying questions. Here are answers to your follow-up questions. Yes, I see the content. And then it's also asking to check the network tab. So here, this is the network tab on the front end. So you can see to generate contents here. So just click on that. And this is like the API call. And then if you click response, this is what the front end received. So this is the actual tweet that was updated. So new to ChatGPT, don't worry. And you can tell it's a tweet because it's just super short. Whereas if you look at the previous call, this response, super long, right? So we know they're 2 different prompts. Yes, I see it returned in the logs and and the network tab. 2, are we seeing any console errors? No console errors. 3, is the issue occurring for all platforms or only for specific ones? I'll say all platforms. 4, when you say you don't see the generate, is the generator not updating at all or is it showing outdated content? So here, I don't think it's updating at all. Oh, well, it is showing outdated content. I'm not sure if it updated. I see outdated content. 5, are we certain that set generated content function? I'm not certain. Number 6, is there any specific state management library on being used in this project? Redux, MobX, or are we relying on React's use state? I believe we're relying solely on React's use state. Just in general, avoid introducing more libraries unless absolutely necessary. That's just in general. Are there any requirements for persisting the generated content between page reloads or browser sessions? No, I don't think we need to do that. Should we implement any visual feedback? Yes, that would be very nice. Okay, let's hit enter. I just love it when the AI asks clarifying questions because it always asks things that like you didn't think about. Even if you don't need it like right now, you can keep it in mind for future versions to improve the user experience. This works much better than just being like, it doesn't work and you fix it, because then the AI may not know where to start. It'll try like all sorts of things and rewrite different parts. The more specific you are with what's missing versus what's working well already, so don't touch that, the better answers you're going to get, the smoother experience you're going to have. Okay, so let's apply these changes. Accept generated content. Okay, accept. Oh, we're going to create a new file called loadingspinner.tsx, which probably honestly was unnecessary, but I I'm just a sucker for loading spinners. Okay, hit play. Yeah, just make sure you've saved all the files. Okay, and then let's test it out. Opening up our console log just in case there's any issues. Okay, this is generated prompt. Edit prompt, write a 200 character from the input. Okay, and there we go. So it updated the generated content, and now we see the tweets, and we had a really cute loading spinner too. So we're pretty much done with this first feature. And so just to recap what we completed, we already had the functionality where it repurposed this content through an API called the ChatGPT. But what else we want is to edit the prompt that's being used and then regenerate the content from one click. And so now if I do this again, right, let's say write a 10-point bullet list, a 10 item bullet point list from the input, something like that. Save and regenerate. Now it shows the loading spinner, and it should regenerate the content again. Okay, see? Perfect. So yeah, this works pretty much exactly as we want. And the purpose of this feature is, like, for me, if I'm repurposing my own content, for example, this YouTube video, and I want to send it to my newsletter, Facebook, like a TikTok video script, whatever, I kind of want to see everything in one place and have my default high quality prompts do the first pass, but then I might want to tweak the prompt, and I want to do it on a platform specific basis, and I want to do it all in one place. For me, it's important I see the original content, compare it with the generated content, and then make sure I don't lose any important information. Like for me, I want that level of control. And so yeah, so this feature can be marked done. So let's go ahead and commit it and everything. So here, do Control X, let's do exit, and then you can do git status. So this shows you what changes you made, what files will be added. So I do git dash capital A. So that adds all of the changes. And then git commit dash M is the message. And the message is display generated output to user. Okay. And then we're going to push this again to our branch prompt. Okay, and that's pretty much it. Now, since we're done with this feature, you have two choices. You can either merge this branch to main because you're kind of done with it and it's good to go. And then from main, you can create a new branch for the next feature we're going to implement, or you can keep adding changes to this branch and just merge it to main later when you're done. I personally like to create a new branch for each new feature, but just for the sake of this video series, I'm just going to keep everything in this branch and then commit everything to main and then merge everything to main at the end, just so we don't spend a lot of time on it. But my personal workflow usually is, new feature, new chore, new bug, whatever it is, I have a separate branch for each of those. So the next thing we're going to do is set up Firebase as our database. So go ahead and create an account if you haven't yet. Again, in my newsletter, I'll have the link to everything. Here, firebase.google.com, click get started. And then basically here's the prompt to generate the initial scaffolding for the Firebase integration. So we're going to put this in here at the end of the prompt. It's really important to explain step by step how to set up a new Firebase project from scratch. So just as a best practice, if I'm integrating a new API or anything external, I like to include this at the end of the prompt to make sure I understand how to go through setting it up. Go ahead and copy this and go to cursor, and we're going to create a new chat. Okay, because we don't want all the context from the previous chats. Made a note here to make sure you run it with the entire code base as context. Okay, so here, copy it, paste it to do command enter. So run with entire code base as context. And you can confirm it here when it says global context like that. That means it's running with the entire code base. Here are the paths to the newly created files. So we're going to have to go in and create these files. So let's do that first, and then we'll go to the next part. So app/utils file. Base.ts, okay, and then app/hooks. I don't believe we have a hooks directory. No, so we're going to create hooks, and then we're going to create a file called use Firebase, and then app/components, new file, Firebase provider. Okay, cool. Now let's go through the step-by-step process of setting up a new Firebase project from scratch. So I go to the Firebase console. So that's console.firebase.google.com. Click on get started with a new project, add project. So let's call this project Remix. Accept the terms. Okay. Continue. Okay. I do have a Google Analytics account. You can skip that if you don't have an Analytics account. So yeah, we'll just follow the instructions here. Once the project is created, click on Add App and choose Web Platform, which is this one. Okay, nickname is called Remix. We don't need Firebase hosting right now, so just click Register App. You'll be presented with a configuration object, which we'll use in our code. Okay, so here, install the Firebase SDK by running npm install Firebase. So go to your terminal, run npm install Firebase. Now we will create the scaffold for Firebase integration. Here, I'm just going to ask it to clarify which files for steps 1, 2, 3 in your answer that should be created. Because remember, in the previous step, we kind of already created the file, so we just want to make sure it's aligned with what it wants us to use. So we're going to do util/Firebase first. So that's number 1. Okay, let's go to step 1. This is the Firebase configuration file, util/firebase.ts. Okay, accept. Okay. So step 2 is app/hook/use Firebase. Okay, scrolling back up to step 2. Okay, accept, and then hit save, and then create a Firebase provider component. So that's going to be this component/Firebase provider. Click accept. Okay, and then update app/file layouts. Okay, click accept, hit save, and create a .env local. I believe we already have one for our open API key. Okay, so I don't want to reveal my .env local because it has my open API key, but what you're going to do is copy this, add it to .env.local, and obviously replace all of these variables with the stuff from your project. And if you go back to the Firebase website, that's where you can see it. You can see like the Firebase config. Here are some tips to add features that use Firebase. As always, like be concise and clear in what it is you're trying to do with a feature. Ask for the overview of the data model that it's going to create based on your feature request. For new features, I only use Firebase context to drive the output instead of like including the entire code base as the context. And then for existing features, I like to include previously implemented CRUD features and like give that as an example to AI so it can follow the same format, the same structure. So I'll say something like, for this new feature, follow the same CRUD structure as this other feature specified in this other file. Something like that. And then, yeah, just do your best to think through the data model. Like each user, can they have multiple prompts? Yes. What are the fields that a prompt should have? Probably like a text field and a created at, the timestamp. So think about like the objects in your data model, like a prompt is an object, a user is an object, the relationship between those objects, so a user has multiple prompts, etc. And the next feature we're going to be working on is CRUD for prompts. So being able to create, read, meaning use the prompt, sending it to OpenAI, update a prompt, and delete a prompt. So if you're not technical, CRUD just is acronym for create, read, update, delete. And this feature, like I said, it allows users to create a prompt, read the prompt, which means using it, sending it to ChatGPT for repurposing content, update the prompt to make them better, and delete prompts you no longer want. That's a typo. And just fixing a typo here, we're going to use these files as context, use firebase.ts and firebase.ts. So here's the prompt for implementing CRUD for prompts. Think about the relationship. So can a user have only one prompt, many prompts? In our case, each user will have many prompts. You'll have like a whole prompt library and you can pick and choose which prompt you want to use for each platform. Each prompt belongs to a user. Output functionality into a separate service file designed to interact with the Firebase data. And all that means is we're asking for a separate file that is then going to interact with the data from our database. And before producing the code, think through it step by step and output the data model so you can review it before it goes ahead and does it. And you'll want to review that data model, make sure it represents relationships you're thinking of correctly. And then, as usual, before start working on this feature, ask me any clarification questions. Go over to Cursor. I'm going to start a new chat so the context is fresh. And then I'm going to tag the files, use firebase.ts, and then firebase.ts. Okay, so you can remove it from here. That was just kind of a placeholder for my blog post. Now here are the clarifying questions. Here are answers to your questions. So number 1, what specific field should be included in a prompt? So I like the fields it mentioned. Yes, include fields like title, content. You might want to name a prompt like a shorthand, like tweet 60 or tweet no emojis or whatever, and that title would be separate from the prompt itself. Do we need to implement any sort of sorting or filtering for prompts? Yes. Are there any limits? No limits. Implement any validation? No. Real-time functionality such as live updates. No, out of scope. Are there any specific error handling? No. I'll just say not sure, actually. Do we need to implement any pagination for retrieving prompts, especially if a user has many prompts? Let's say no for now. Okay. We will probably want to implement that later, though. First, let's think through the steps and design the data model. So here's a collection called prompts, okay, with documents representing individual prompts. Each document will have a reference to the user that created it. What the data model looks like: prompts, prompt ID, and then the title of the prompt, the content created at, update at, and the user, reference to the user who created it. And then here are the steps for implementing CRUD operations: create a new file, implement blah, blah, blah. Now let's start implementing the code. So what I would want to do, since I forgot to ask, is to clarify what the files and the file paths. Clarify the file names and file paths for files that must be created. I'm just asking that in the same chat. So again, it already has the context of this conversation. Okay, so we're going to create a new directory called services. Okay, create a new file called prompt service. And this file will contain all the functions for CRUD as it relates to prompts. Okay, let's go ahead and apply this to the new file. And this is going to, hitting this will implement all this code: create a prompt function, implement update, implement delete, implement sorting and filtering. Okay, it's still creating. And what we're going to do, so when you implement another CRUD-like feature like this, what you can do is pass this file as context to Cursor and say, like I said over here in my newsletter, for this new feature, follow the same CRUD structure as the prompt feature specified in this file, prompt service.ts. And what that does, it's a template almost, so it gives Cursor a very clear idea of how you want a new CRUD feature to be created, and it's consistent with the code base. All right, so just to recap what we walked through today, I showed you some Cursor settings to force it to use Claude 3.5 Sonnet, my process for adding new logic. We implemented a new feature where you can edit the prompt and regenerate the output. We added Firebase as our database, and then we created the CRUD routes for being able to create, read, update, and delete prompts. Next up, we will build like a little table where users can see the prompts that they have, update them, create new ones, delete them, and we'll also build out user authentication so people can actually sign up and then see the prompts that they created. So my name is Sabrina Ramonov. If you like this kind of stuff, hit like, hit subscribe, drop a comment below. Look forward to hearing from you.